Hey guys, welcome back. So, after the last three lessons, we talked about how World War I started. We talked about what it looked like conducting World War I and what that looked like. And we talked about the Treaty of Versailles, or the end of World War I. Right, the idea that the end of World War I is the war to end all wars. Well, we know that's not true, and we know that's not how it happened. So today's lesson, guys, is we're going to look at two former major land-based empires. We're going to look at the Ottoman Empire, and we're going to look at the Russian Empire, and we are going to tear them apart, both of them. So long story short, the 20th century so far has been pretty tumultuous. We've started off with World War I, and now we are about to tear apart some land-based empires. So fasten your seatbelts, guys, and get ready to take a sledgehammer to some empires. So guys, we'll start. We're still in period 4, still talking about global conflict. All right, we'll start with some memes, and then we'll head right on to Ottoman and Russian collapse. We're going to start with the Ottomans, and then we're going to move on to the Russians. Okay, as usual, if you're tuning in because you missed class, please shoot me an email so I can let you know what in-class work you missed. All right, a couple memes for you. Yes, exactly. That's exactly what the Treaty of Versailles looked like. Another one. Yeah. So guys, when we are talking about the collapse of the Ottomans and Russians, I'm going to look at both empires separate. But to start, the curriculum's pretty clear. So you have to know that both the Ottomans and the Russian empires collapsed due to a confluence of internal and external issues by the end of World War I. So a lot of the things we're going to talk about, we see the seeds of discontent. We see sort of the problems that ultimately lead to the collapse of these two major empires. We see them much earlier. Okay, we're going to see the Russian Empire start to collapse towards the late 19th century. Okay, we're also going to see the Ottomans kind of entering into World War I as the quote-unquote sick man of Europe. But it's not until after World War I that you see these two empires really tumble down. All right, so just make sure you guys understand that you have both internal and external. And we're going to go into both the internal and external components in just a second. So guys, I really want to give you guys context on these empires before launching into lectures of them. So the Ottoman Empire, guys, the Ottoman Empire lasts for hundreds of years. Okay, while they did not exist in period 1, we did draw a G-Persia chart about those Muslim merchants. All right, we said wherever there's trade, there's Muslim merchants, and they're really coming from these regions that eventually become the Ottoman Empire. All right, so trade is a major component of what will eventually become the Ottoman Empire. All right, the Ottoman Empire is a period 2 land-based empire. So we said it is a gunpowder empire. So it's the Ottomans, the Safavids, the Mughals, as well as the Ming and the Qing empires. So in the Ottoman Empire, this is a predominantly Muslim empire. And you can see that from the map, guys. You have large chunks of the Middle East. You have Northern Africa. All right, so these are parts of what becomes the Ottoman Empire. All right, but just because the empire is run by a Muslim leader called the Caliph doesn't necessarily mean that all of the subjects are Muslim. So we talked about the fact that the Ottoman Empire has to be inclusive, has to be tolerant, because as they're taking over land, specifically in Eastern Europe, they're also acquiring Christians, okay? And we said that one thing that the Ottomans will do to white Christian boys, they will implement the Devshirme system, okay? So make sure you guys know what that is. Now, by the end of period 2 and kind of coming into period 3, the Ottoman Empire is not so great, okay? The Ottoman Empire, we said the leaders of the Ottoman Empire were relatively conservative. They're not interested in this sort of liberalization of this modernization. They're not interested in modernization of their economy. Okay, they don't really industrialize. They try to industrialize in the end of period 3 using through British and French, but it's not really that effective. All right. So ultimately, when they try to modernize their economy, it fails because of those sort of conservative leaders. Okay. So this all gets us to period 4. Okay. The Ottoman Empire is going to collapse because of a bunch of different reasons. So the internal causes, all right, so within the empire, industrialization fails. Okay, as I said, guys, they attempt to industrialize through loans. All right, so they're going to take out lots of loans through the French and British empires. Their industrialization attempts don't really work, and instead they're stuck with really big bills that they owe the British and French. And so because of those really big loans, you're going to get economic imperialism. So the British and French are going to kind of come in and start to really exert pressure on the government, okay? Ultimately, they also have failed reforms. So we said that when the Ottoman Empire attempts to modernize their military, attempts to modernize the state, industrialize, modernize the military, modernize the economy, the conservatives within will push back on that and not allow it to happen. All right. They also have serious issues of nationalism. Okay. So these big land-based empires within period 4 all tend to have issues with nationalism. And I'm not saying like Ottomans have nationalist issue. I'm saying that smaller local groups of people that historically lived under the Ottoman inclusive and tolerance start to look around and realize that they're a different ethnic group than these Ottomans. They practice a different religion. Okay, so, white Christians or these Eastern Europeans are going to start, asking to break away from the Ottoman Empire. They want to form their own nation states. Okay, so nationalism is also going to be a major component. And in this picture, guys, this is a political cartoon from World War I. All right, we're going to talk about what this means in a second, but I do want you to understand that during the beginning of the 20th century, okay, so that started period 4, the Ottoman Empire was known as the sick man of Europe. All right, everyone anticipated the sick man of Europe to collapse at any moment, and World War I tended to exacerbate that collapse. Now, external causes. All right, remember, guys, the British and the French were using economic imperialism to control the Ottoman Empire. So both the British and the French, as well as the Germans at the start of World War I, offered concessions to the Ottomans if they would join. And the Ottomans ultimately joined World War I because Germany promised them that all of their debts would be paid off. So they owed a ton of money to the British and the French. And so if the Ottomans came in on the side of the Germans, Germany would make sure all those debts would be gone. Okay. Well, yeah, that's obviously that's not what ends up happening. The Ottoman Empire does join, and we know that the Ottoman Empire, even though they were the sick man of Europe, Ottoman troops did fight against British and French, and particularly British soldiers. And ultimately, at the end of World War I, the Ottoman Empire is going to lose a boatload of territory. So we talked maybe 2 lessons ago about the mandate system. Okay, so all that land in today's Middle East, all right, modern day Israel, modern day Palestine, Syria, all of that land is going to eventually be ceded to the British and the French. Okay, so we're starting to see some of the seeds of issues that we see today in the 21st century. But so the Ottoman's going to collapse, and a lot of the territory of this land-based empire is going to go with it. But guys, before we talk a little bit more about what happens when the Ottoman Empire fully collapses, we do need to talk about something that the Ottoman Empire does during World War I. All right, now on a normal year, you guys, my sophomores, would have been able to visit the Holocaust Museum in Atlanta. And unfortunately, because of COVID, we can't really do that this year. So I want to make sure you guys have in your notes what a genocide is, because we're going to talk about the first genocide in the 20th century. So in the Ottoman Empire, as we said, during period 2 and period 3, you have groups of white Christians. okay, including one group called the Armenians. Now, during World War I, the Turks will commit a genocide, or the Ottomans will commit a genocide against the Armenian people. Okay, so what is a genocide? Well, essentially, it's the deliberate killing of a large number of people from a particular nation or ethnic group with the aim of destroying that nation or group. Now, the big one, obviously, that you guys know about is the Holocaust. Okay, in World War II, Germany is going to commit a genocide against people of Jewish faith. All right, there will be lots of incidences of genocide throughout the 20th century. We are only talking about the first one today. And it's one that even today is still relatively contentious, okay? In fact, modern day Turkey, which is the historic, well, it's the current land of what used to be the Ottoman Empire, Turkey still says this never actually happened. They're still denying that the genocide ever happened. Now, during World War I, okay, once the Ottomans join up with the Germans, they're also going to start, the rest of the world is distracted. So this formerly inclusive, this formerly tolerant empire is now going to target groups, these groups of people that, they're worried about nationalism. They're worried about these groups of people that aren't Muslims, all right, that are a different ethnic group that potentially want to break away from the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire's lost so much land as it is. So these Armenian people are white, okay? They are Christian, and they are minorities that have lived in the Ottoman Empire for hundreds of years. And they're very, very successful. They're very educated people, okay? And there's really no proof that any Armenians really wanted to break away from the Ottoman Empire. But while the rest of the world was distracted by World War I, the Ottomans began this just mass genocide, all right? Hundreds of thousands of Armenians would be killed, sent to camps and just brutally slaughtered in the worst ways that you can think, okay? So this estimate right here, 800,000 to 1 million, this is a very conservative estimate of how many Armenians were killed. We actually don't know for sure because, we're still to this day still finding bodies. We're still finding skeletons, places where these people were, mass killed, all right? Now, this is the first genocide of the 20th century. And the truth is, guys, is while this was going on, the West didn't know it was happening, right? Britain and France were distracted on the Western Front. The United States was trying to stay out of the war as it was, all right? Germany didn't know it was happening either. But at the end of the war, when the knowledge of this genocide was starting to become common knowledge, the Western powers, after the Treaty of Versailles, after everybody, the United States goes and becomes isolated, after the League of Nations kind of starts to do its own thing, the Western powers don't actually condemn the nation state of Turkey. All right, they don't actually, they don't say anything. They completely ignore this genocide happened. And the problem is, guys, is that it inspires genocides in the future. All right, in fact, Hitler is noted, and I'm paraphrasing here, but Hitler is noted as saying that because of the Armenian genocide, he sort of drew inspiration on this when he ordered the Holocaust to happen. All right, so genocides are going to happen. Armenian genocide is the first one. All right, we're going to follow that up with the Holocaust, which we'll talk about in a few weeks. But genocides happen a lot, especially when Western powers or nation states refuse to either acknowledge or condemn this. Okay, now, pretty hard stuff to talk about, okay? But the Ottoman Empire completely collapses, and we've got to figure out what exactly is going to happen to this former land. Now, as I've already alluded to, the modern nation state that we all know of today, Turkey, is going to kind of rise from the ashes of the Ottoman Empire. Now, the first major leader of this nation state called Turkey is a man named Mustafa Ataturk, just Ataturk, whatever. Now, he is a liberal. All right, he wants Turkey to be a liberal democracy. He wants to promote education for men and women. All right, he's interested in making Turkey, this Muslim state, very similar to the West, very similar to the United States, Great Britain, France, all that stuff. The problem is that right after the Ottoman Empire collapses, he kind of understands that in order to kind of drive this nation state to be one thing, he has to be kind of a dictator. Okay. So Ataturk will initially be a dictator and will later sort of loosen up the reins and become more of a liberal democracy. Okay. Now, because of Ataturk, and he really is the father of the modern day nation state of Turkey, right? And Turkey, even today in 2021, is a liberal democracy. Now, I know, there's been some ups and downs. All right. Even today, the leader of Turkey is kind of not so great of a guy. But for the most part, Turkey really modernizes through the leader, this Ataturk guy. Okay, so he builds a liberal democracy, especially after his death. He's promoting education for boys and girls. He's also promoting suffrage for boys and girls. All right, so women are also going to gain the right to vote in Turkey. So it will be the first Muslim democracy, and he is going to promote westernization. And you can see, even in the picture, all right, he's wearing a suit and tie. That's Western clothing. He's not wearing, historical Ottoman sort of garb. So again, that nation state we know of today is Turkey, capital Istanbul. All right, that is going to be basically due to this guy right here, Ataturk. Okay, so guys, we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about Russia. And from here on out, Russia is going to be very important. In fact, in 2 days, we're going to have a whole Russia-centric lesson. But we've got to figure out how Russia gets to the point where we can talk about Russia for a whole lesson. And one way to do that is to give you guys context. So we didn't talk about Russia at all during period 1. In period 2, the only thing we said really about Russia is that we had eastward expansion. Okay, we said Russia was kind of right in this area and slowly started to expand eastward and take over indigenous people through the process of Russification. Russia was also ruled by an absolute monarch. All right, so absolutism was the practice of this area. Now in period 3, we still have eastward expansion, we still have Russification, but the change this time is that the Tsar also will have state-sponsored industrialization. So the absolute government will start to pay for the building of factories, railroads, mines. All right, so they're going to shift away from those peasants who are working on farms. They're going to shift away from the feudalistic society to people more working in factories. Okay, but it's very expensive. And they're going to be having to take loans out from Britain and France in order to sponsor this industrialization. But you still have an absolute monarch under the Tsar. All right. The problem is with industrialization here, you don't have the liberal reforms you see in Great Britain, France, the United States. Now, in period 4, at the very start of period 4, we've talked a little bit about Russia, which they're going to lose the War of the Japanese. So in 1906, they lose the Russo-Japanese War to an Asian state that they consider vastly inferior to them. Okay, they're also going to join World War I in 1914 on the side of the Allies. So they'll join with France and Britain on the other side of Germany, all right? But they're also going to drop out of the war early. So in 1917, they're going to commit with a separate peace with Germany. So you guys probably remember me saying that the Russians will lose the most amount of men in World War I, and they will also lose the most amount of land in World War I. And they will leave the war early, so bad for them. But in 1917, guys, there is a revolution to overthrow the absolute monarch. And that's the story we have to talk about today, guys. We need to talk about the Russian Revolution and what that means. And as I said, and I'm going to emphasize this over and over again, Russia is about to become a major protagonist in our AP World History story. So as I said, guys, in period 3, you had state-sponsored industrialization. So you have Russia and you have Japan, where the federal government is paying to industrialize. So they're paying for the building of these factories. They're paying for the building of these mines and railroads. All right. But the big difference between what you see in, we said in Japan, after the Japanese government industrializes, they sell off the industry to private companies called zaibatsu. Okay. In Russia, that doesn't happen. So the federal government keeps the industry. So the problem is that while people are really angry about all the horrors of industrialization, they're angry at their government because the government does not offer political reforms. So people are angry. All right, industrialization is good for the economy, but children are working in the factories. People are working 20-hour shifts. All right, and because of this absolute monarchy, they're not offering political concessions. They're not giving people a right to vote. They're not allowing people to speak out against the government. All right, if you speak out against the government, all right, it's an absolute monarchy. So this all kind of culminates into the year 1917, guys. So as we said, Russia joins the war in 1914. And Russia had some really good moments, right? Because they mobilized so quickly, Germany actually was not able to beat France with the Schlieffen Plan, so that's good. The problem was is that the war is going very poorly, all right? As in most wars, Russia is getting destroyed. All right, even though they have a lot of citizens, a lot of population, they just can't hold on. So in 1917, because the war is going so poorly, Tsar Nicholas II is going to step down. Okay, so he steps down in 1917. Let me emphasize, he is not killed, okay? Instead, he is replaced by a liberal provisional government. So it's kind of similar to a democracy, okay? Part of the thinking behind this was if the Tsar goes away, we can have a government that we can actually have more success in this war because we've got people who are elected to run, okay? But the problem is that the war continues to go poorly for Russia, okay? Germany is still destroying Russia. It's going very poorly for them. So at the end of the year, all right, in October, we're going to get something called the Russian Revolution. Now, let me give you guys the background information on this. All right, this guy right here, let me go ahead and just show you what he looks like. This guy right here, Vladimir Lenin, okay? He is the leader of the Bolsheviks, all right? Bolsheviks are Russian communists, okay? So please keep that in mind. You will see Bolsheviks again. So the Bolsheviks are unhappy with the war. They don't think we should have ever even gotten into World War I in the first place. But Lenin was actually kicked out of Russia. Even though he was the leader of this communist party, he was expelled from Russia. But that all changes in 1917, right as this provisional government is going to change. So, funny story. Lenin was sitting in a coffee shop in Switzerland when a couple of German spies came up to him in 1917 and said, "Bro, you want to go back to Russia?" And he says, "Absolutely. I need to lead my people. I need to become this great communist utopia." So the Germans actually help get Lenin back into Russia. Okay? And very quickly, as he gets back into Russia, he helps to overthrow the government and fully seize power from this provisional government. Okay, so the Bolsheviks are able to completely overthrow this liberal provisional government. And almost instantaneously, Russia becomes the first communist state in the world. Now, this is just crazy in itself because if you think back to Karl Marx and you think back to that Communist Manifesto, he wasn't writing about Russia. He was writing about Germany. And he probably would have been very shocked that the first successful communist state in the world was not Germany, but a feudalistic society called Russia. Now, almost immediately after the Bolsheviks seize government power, they surrender to Germany, okay? So 7 to 10 million Russians are going to die in World War I. And because these German spies got Lenin back into Russia in order to have this October Revolution, Lenin's going to make huge concessions. All right, Lenin's going to give up huge amounts of land in Eastern Russia to the Germans, okay? And because they exited the war early, remember 2 years before the Treaty of Versailles is signed, even though the Allies will eventually beat Germany without the Russians, the Treaty of Versailles isn't going to help Russia, all right? Great Britain and France are going to be pissed at Russia for leaving early. And so they're not gonna, they're not gonna write into the Treaty of Versailles, to give Russia that land back. Okay. And here's where most people get their history wrong. Russia leaves World War I after 1917. And what you would think is, hey, they got out of the war, things are going to be great for them. Okay. They no longer have to deal with, they no longer have to deal with fighting the Germans. Turns out things go from bad to worse. So between 1917 and 1920, Russia's going to undergo one of the deadliest, the deadliest civil war in history. Okay. It's going to be a war fought between the Reds and the Whites, the Reds being communists, the Whites being liberals. All right. Well, sort of liberals and conservatives, basically anyone who's not a communist. So on top of the 7 to 10 million Russian soldiers that will die during World War I, another 20 million are going to die during the Russian Civil War. Okay. And here is where, again, people get their history tripped up. People seem to think that in 1917, the provisional government kills off the Russian Tsar, but that's not true, okay? Anastasia and Nicholas and Alexandra, that sort of Romanov family, they're actually killed as a result of the Bolsheviks. So once the Bolsheviks, the Russian communists, take over the Russian government, they are trying to kill off these non-communists, these liberals and conservatives that are fighting back against them. And they just go ahead and just kill off the entire Russian royal family. So for those of you who've watched the animated movie Anastasia, I hate to burst your bubble here, but Anastasia was actually killed, okay? Fictional cartoon, did not survive and she did not escape. But again, people tend to think that it was the provisional government that killed the Tsar, and it wasn't. It was during this Russian Civil War, the Bolsheviks had them killed, okay? So we're almost done, guys. I know that my face is sort of right here, kind of overtaking the person I wanted you guys to actually see in this picture, so I'm sorry about that. But what I need you guys to understand is that in the aftermath of the October Revolution and the aftermath of the Russian Civil War, the Russian Communist Party is successful. So the Reds annihilate the Whites. And again, this is the first communist movement in the world that is successful. And communism has been around now for about 50 years, okay? And yes, as I said, Karl Marx would be very surprised that it happened in Russia, because at the time that Karl Marx wrote the book, Russia was a peasant state. It was mostly farming, agriculture. Like, they didn't have factories. So I think Karl Marx would have been very surprised by Russia, okay? But this is a successful communist movement. And now that you have this successful communist movement, it is time to actually implement this communist utopia in which everyone is equal, in which everyone is making the same amount of money, in which everybody is working to benefit everyone else. Now, Vladimir Lenin was an idealist, all right? And he wasn't, I hesitate to say that he was a good man, because he wasn't, but he wasn't a bad man, okay? The problem is, guys, is that after the Russian Civil War, in order to actually implement this new communist utopia, you have to have a leader who is a good leader, who understands communism, and who understands how to make people do work. And the problem is, guys, is the sort of great fates of history is that Lenin is going to die. All right. So as soon as this Russian Civil War is over, Lenin bites the big one, and he's not going to be around to implement this sort of new communist utopia that he's promised the Russian people. Unfortunately, it's going to be left up to a successor. And I started off talking about the transition from World War I to the Russian Civil War as going from bad to worse. Well, we're going from bad to worse to even worse than that, because Lenin's successor is going to be a man named Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin is one of the most evil men in history. Okay, it's not really my opinion, it's a fact. And we are going to talk a lot about him and the cult of personality and absolute crazy stuff this man comes up with in the coming days. Okay? So guys, if you miss class, please send me an email, all right? And I'll let you know what missed assignments we're going to be doing today. And if, whatever, if not, if you guys, I hope you guys took good notes, and in the coming days, we'll be continuing talking about Russia. So have a good rest of your day, guys, and I will see you in class.